Hello everyone, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. Wishing you all an enjoyable listening experience. Today, we're going to share a book called Super Thinking. Gabriel Weinberg and Lauren McCann, both with multidisciplinary degrees from MIT, discovered that world-renowned problem solvers, forecasters, and decision-makers possess a superpower, super thinking. This means they understand how to leverage mental models from various fields to navigate complexity, distinguish good ideas from bad ones, and enhance their thinking abilities to make better decisions in both personal and professional aspects of life. If you aspire to become a problem-solving expert, avoid getting stuck in a rut, break through obstacles, and escape habitual thinking, it's essential to have a wealth of mental models at your disposal to tackle unexpected situations. Therefore, the authors systematically categorize and explain all cross-disciplinary mental models, enabling you to generate flexible ideas, solve challenges, and make sound decisions based on different circumstances. By reading this book, you will empower yourself to become wiser. So, what is worldly wisdom? Let's dissect these two words one by one. Worldly implies a focus on everyday life, while wisdom suggests having a broader perspective when dealing with life's entirety. However, it goes beyond that. Merely knowing numerous isolated facts isn't particularly useful, as American investor Charlie Munger once said, if you can't connect the dots in a theoretical framework, those facts don't add up to much for you. In essence, worldly wisdom involves incorporating our knowledge about life into theoretical models to explain everyday problems. But where can you find these models? This is precisely the question Gabriel Weinberg and Lauren McCann aim to answer in this book. They harness knowledge from economics, physics, philosophy, and many other disciplines to present a new set of models that will help you understand the world, make better decisions, and elevate your thinking to a new level. In this book, you'll learn how a 14th-century philosopher can teach you about dating, why avoiding mistakes is more critical than being right, and what insights about reciprocity we can gain from Israeli kindergartens. Super thinking employs reliable cognitive blueprints to help us make sense of this world and make better decisions. We make numerous decisions every day, and not all of them are monumental. However, when wrong decisions accumulate, we might find ourselves facing crises like overdraft bank accounts, unhappy marriages, or bleak career prospects. This implies that every decision we make is significant. Yet, life is filled with complex puzzles and ambiguous answers. So, when we make decisions, we often feel like we're not acting rationally but rather swinging a blade in the dark, wondering if there's a better way. Well, super thinking is a way of understanding the world. It relies on validated cognitive blueprints to help people comprehend chaotic states. Let's take a closer look at what it specifically is. Every industry has its own mental models, allowing practitioners to create mental images of problems. These mental images are not one-time snapshots but rather techniques that can be repeatedly applied, known as models. In other words, mental models are recurring concepts used to explain the world. Most mental models are highly refined and are used only by experts. However, there are also some mental models with broad applicability. These models can help us understand everyday life. For instance, the concept of critical mass is used by physicists to describe the minimum amount of mass required to initiate a triggering in-chain reaction. But in other contexts, like technological innovation, it's a convenient model. The fax machine was invented in the 1940s, but it took more than a century for this machine to emerge. Why? The cost of manufacturing fax machines meant that only a few wealthy individuals and prosperous businesses could afford the expense. This affected the perceived value of fax machines. Even if you bought a fax machine, you couldn't communicate with anyone you knew. Later, as costs decreased, more people purchased fax machines, enabling them to connect with more people. In numerical terms, 2 devices can have 1 connection, 5 devices can have 10 connections, and 12 devices can have 66 connections. By the 1970s, fax machines had reached a critical mass, meaning there were enough machines to make the network itself useful. If you owned a fax machine, you could likely connect with anyone in the world. Contemporary businesses have capitalized on this. For example, the concept of critical mass enables ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft to calculate how many drivers they need in a city before people start relying on their services. This is not the only supermodel you can use to solve complex problems. Next, we will see many shortcuts that can help you boost your cognitive abilities and avoid unnecessary errors. The way we perceive things determines how we view them. This statement comes from the 19th century German mathematician Carl Jacobi. What's his motto? Invert, always invert. This means that when you approach a problem from the opposite or inverted angle, it often becomes easier to solve. For instance, investors typically think their goal is to make money, but Jacobi would say they're actually trying to avoid losing money. This is also a process for decision-making. Common sense tells us that making better decisions means making more correct decisions. Inversion tells us that making the best decisions actually means reducing the likelihood of errors occurring. This means avoiding what tennis players call unforced errors, those mistakes caused by your own carelessness rather than your opponent's tactics. Think of hitting the net while serving, and you'll get it. To avoid unforced errors, you need to pay attention to your reasoning process. You can use what's called bottom-up thinking or first principles reasoning. It starts with assumptions you are confident are correct. Elon Musk, founder of car and energy company Tesla, defines it as boiling things down to the most fundamental truths and reasoning up from there. For example, when Musk was looking for a battery pack for his electric vehicles, he was told he'd never get a cost below $600 per kilowatt-hour. He didn't believe it. The first principles reasoning led him to ask two questions: what does it take to make a battery pack, and what do these materials cost on the stock market? The answer was cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, polymer, and a sealed container. This brought the cost down to $80 per kilowatt-hour. Musk realized the solution was to buy the materials and build the batteries himself, resulting in cheaper batteries than anticipated. You can also apply bottom-up reasoning to everyday decision-making. For instance, when you're job hunting, many people expend a lot of effort applying to various positions and grab the first opportunity that comes along. The principle of first principles reasoning offers a different approach. Before sending out your resume, sit down and examine your values. Is independence, status, and money the most important factors for you? Then, draw your red lines. For example, how long of a commute can you tolerate, or what's the lowest level position you're willing to accept? Finally, assess the available positions. This is a form of inversion. Instead of asking which job you can get, you're asking which jobs suit you. Occam's razor might even help you open the door to love. As I just mentioned, sound reasoning is built on fundamental facts. But how do you know those facts are correct? This is an age-old question. For instance, the 2nd century Roman astronomer Ptolemy believed that explaining phenomena with the simplest assumptions was a good principle. 1200 years later, the English philosopher William of Ockham arrived at the same conclusion. Faced with equally credible and contradictory assumptions, the simpler assumption is more likely to be correct. Let's call it Occam's razor principle. This principle can help you eliminate unnecessary complexity in explanations. In other words, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. This model is useful, such as in dating. The rise of dating apps and websites has made it easier than ever to filter potential partners based on highly specific criteria. To exaggerate slightly, you can even search for a blue-eyed Brazilian who loves hot yoga and raspberry ice cream. While not an entirely impossible combination, it does limit your pool of potential dates. Occam's razor theory suggests that this complicates matters. Based on past experiences, we all know that even if someone prefers chocolate over raspberry ice cream and has brown eyes instead of blue, they could still get along with you. Furthermore, if the person lacks a sense of humor or lacks attractiveness, the relationship may not have much potential, even if they don't like hot yoga, which you can introduce them to over time. This makes sense. In the beginning, stick to the most fundamental principles. It's also a good way to overcome common logical fallacies. In 1983, psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman conducted an experiment that remains famous today. In the experiment, participants had to consider a question about Linda, a 31-year-old single woman who is straight, intelligent, studied philosophy in college, and participated in feminist activities. So, is Linda more likely to be a bank teller or an active feminist bank teller? Most people chose the latter. This is an example of the conjunction fallacy, which states that the probability of two events occurring together is always less than or equal to the probability of either event occurring alone. Remember, not all bank tellers are feminists. Returning to the matter of dating, are you more likely to find an interesting partner or someone who shares your cultural interests or even the same flavor of ice cream? If you have an answer to this question, you'll understand why simplifying assumptions is worthwhile. Empathizing with others is a challenging task. However, the veil of ignorance can help you make fairer decisions. Understanding the motivations of others can be tricky, especially when we're not familiar with them. What happens in such cases? We tend to make unfair judgments. For instance, if a colleague sends you a short email with just one line, you might think they don't respect you, rather than considering they might be pressed for time. Psychologists call this a fundamental attribution error. When we explain our own behavior, we do so by observing our motivations and the external environment. But when we explain others' behavior, we tend to attribute it to their fundamental traits. For example, if you run a red light, it's because you needed to get to the hospital. If another driver runs a red light, it's because they have a natural tendency for road rage. This is why it's best to rethink your assumptions, and that's where Occam's razor comes into play. This principle suggests that you should never attribute to malice what can be explained by carelessness. Your neighbor is playing loud music. Is he intentionally trying to disturb you? It's unlikely. He might have simply forgotten how thin the walls are. If you want to think more objectively and go further, you can use the veil of ignorance model, proposed by American philosopher John Rawls in his 1971 work, A Theory of Justice. What's this model all about? Human birth is like a lottery, purely a matter of luck. Some people are lucky, born with plenty of resources and opportunities, while others are unlucky, born with nothing. This doesn't stop people from believing that their privileges and others' disadvantages are deserved. Rawls argued that this distorts our understanding of fairness. Imagine if you had to design a fair society but didn't know what fate you would have within that society. How would you design it? Rawls concluded that if you couldn't be sure whether you'd be born a slave or a free person, you'd consider slavery itself to be unfair. In other words, you would take into account the feelings and interests of every person affected by your decisions, not just your own. This is also a decision model applicable to yourself. Suppose you're a manager at a company that has allowed remote work for employees for a long time but is now considering abolishing this policy for valid reasons. However, if you put yourself behind the veil of ignorance and imagine you could be anyone at the company, would you still abolish this policy? If you were an employee with aging parents to take care of, what would you do? Even if you ultimately stick to your viewpoint, trying out this decision model can help you see things from a new perspective, appreciate others' viewpoints, and the challenges they bring. If you don't want to be left behind by the times, you need to be more adaptable. The peppered moth is a nocturnal species found in temperate climates. It was once very common throughout various regions in the UK. Before the Industrial Revolution, peppered moths in the northwest of England were mostly light-colored. This helped them camouflage against light-colored tree bark. However, between 1811 and 1895, the proportion of black peppered moths increased from 0.01% to 98%. What happened? This is a classic example of Darwin's theory of natural selection. The pollution from coal mines coated trees with a layer of thick soot. Light-colored moths were easy prey for predators against this dark background, while dark-colored moths could blend in and survive. As American scientist Leon Meadkin pointed out, people sometimes confuse survival of the fittest with strength, intelligence, or superior genes. In reality, adaptability is the key, how well organisms can adjust to a changing environment. This is what the story of the black peppered moth teaches us. Societies also evolve over time. If you want to thrive in your social environment, you need to be highly adaptable. How can you achieve this? One good approach is to adopt an experimental thinking model. It involves making scientific observations, forming hypotheses, testing them, analyzing data, and forming new theories, a continuous cycle. Successful individuals and organizations often employ this way of thinking. They are constantly looking for new tools to enhance their productivity, happiness, and physical well-being. Take your health, for example. A wealth of data suggests various diets can benefit your body. Should you go vegan, follow a paleo diet, or consider intermittent fasting? The only way to find the answer is through experimentation. It's not just about randomly trying different diets, it means rigorously testing them one by one and analyzing the results to discover what works best for you. The same applies to your intellect. If you don't try out new ideas, you may get stuck with outdated ones. After all, people's notions are always changing. You might have been taught that the extinction of dinosaurs was caused by the impact of a small asteroid and that Tyrannosaurus rex was a scaly reptile. Now, many experts believe these theories are outdated. Most paleontologists think that T. rex had feathers. If you cling to these old ideas, they'll eventually become as outdated as light-colored moths on sooty trees. Misinterpretation of evidence and the fallacy of assuming correlation implies causation distort our understanding of statistical data. We live in a data-driven world. Data used to be the domain of scientists and engineers, but today, our understanding of everything from climate change to personal life is heavily influenced by data. You might even use apps to track your daily exercise and sleep patterns. Sounds great, right? Yes, but also no. As American writer Mark Twain put it, there are three kinds of lies, damned lies, and statistics. In other words, data can easily mislead. Why is avoiding statistical errors so important? Here's the answer. Whether in the field of nutrition or government policy, claims are often made with the backing of data. Even if they're not intentionally trying to deceive you, the evidence they present is highly susceptible to misinterpretation or exaggeration. The most common reason for this is relying on anecdotal evidence, essentially hearsay and personal experience. From an evolutionary perspective, believing in this incomplete evidence made sense. If you saw someone get sick after eating certain nuts, it was simpler to just avoid those nuts rather than conduct a rigorously controlled nut-eating experiment. However, in other cases, this incomplete evidence can lead to confusion. Think about the stories people tell, like the one where Grandpa smoked a pack of cigarettes every day and lived to be 90 years old. It's an unusual case that doesn't fit into our general understanding of typical experiences. This is somewhat like going to a restaurant and telling your friends if the food was good or bad, rather than just okay. Smoking doesn't necessarily cause lung cancer, but that doesn't mean it doesn't significantly increase the average risk of lung cancer for smokers. There's also a misconception that correlation implies causation, meaning if two things happen together, one must be causing the other. You can see this fallacy in action every year when people get flu shots. Inevitably, some people come down with a cold around the same time and wrongly attribute it to the vaccine. In this example, a confounding factor is missing, a usually less obvious but correct explanation. People tend to get vaccinated during seasons when they are more susceptible to illness. The flu shot doesn't prevent common colds, so people mistakenly think the cold is the flu and that the vaccine, instead of providing protection, caused the illness. This highlights the problem with data. It helps us understand the world, but it can also lead to misunderstandings. Understanding social norms and market norms can disrupt reciprocity. Let's face it, our lives are filled with conflicts. In economics, these situations are sometimes described as social games. In social games, players compete with each other in self-serving ways. Most traditional games are zero-sum, you win, I lose. However, real life is not as black and white as chess. Psychologist Robert Cialdini discussed the issue of tips in his 1984 book, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. We can use this as an example. Research found that servers who gave customers small gifts received higher tips. Offering a single piece of candy after a meal resulted in 3% higher tips than usual. 2 candies increased this percentage to 14%, and 2 candies along with the words, "Dear friend," raised it to 23%. This is a good example of reciprocity, where people tend to repay kindness with kindness. It's a widely recognized, unwritten social norm. However, our behaviors don't always fit neatly into reciprocity. Sometimes, adhering to market norms is more appropriate. When you view something from a market perspective, you consider it from the angle of personal interest. For example, is this $400 babysitting job worth my time? When looking at the same situation from a social perspective, you ask yourself if it's the right thing to do. Should I help my friend by babysitting their child for 4 hours? These viewpoints are both valid. However, when the individuals involved are confused, things can get messy. In his 2008 book, Predictably Irrational, economist Dan Ariely cites an example from an Israeli kindergarten. Parents frequently picked up their children late, so the school decided to impose fines for tardiness. Strangely, this policy led to even more late pickups. Why? Before the school imposed fines, late parents felt guilty and made an effort to be on time. However, introducing market norms weakened their sense of guilt. They no longer felt they owed the kindergarten teacher anything, as they were paying for the service. Interestingly, even when the kindergarten removed the fines, parents didn't revert to their previous behavior. This experiment disrupted both norms, highlighting how important it is to approach things and think about them correctly from the outset, as demonstrated by the Israeli kindergarten example. Superthinking involves using reliable conceptual models to improve your decision-making process and helps you avoid common logical pitfalls. These supermodels are drawn from various disciplines like physics, economics, and philosophy. They provide breakthroughs in complex situations and solve the most challenging puzzles. Whether you are using Occam's razor principle to choose a potential partner, using critical mass to understand an emerging market, or employing the veil of ignorance principle to empathize with others, these superadaptive tools enhance your performance in the cognitive game. The author also offers some suggestions in the book, such as creating a pro-con numerical list to assess your decisions. When you need to make a significant decision, the simplest way is to list all the arguments for and against it. You may assign different values to different arguments, hence the birth of the pro-con numerical list. Through this list, you can evaluate each argument within a scoring range of -10 to 10, helping you understand the relative value of each argument. For example, if you receive a job offer but accepting it means relocating to a new city, what holds a higher score for you, the job location, or the higher salary? While this method may sound simple, it's a powerful thinking model that allows you to conduct systematic cost-benefit analysis before taking risks. Alright, that wraps up this book. Congratulations on another book listening journey. Thank you for tuning in to the Tim Booker channel. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom with practicality to achieve our financial goals and create a better future. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.